Hey, good evening, everyone, to the first episode of Healers, a moral injury community of practice meeting. We do this meeting every month, or we will do this meeting every month. And each month we'll talk about a different aspect of moral injury, how it affects people, how we can help people recover from it. And this is a moral injury community of practice, as I mentioned, which means I'm looking forward to people subscribing, chaplains, psychologists, social workers, public health practitioners, others who want to really learn about this, but also talk about it. It gives practitioners a chance to really talk about what they're doing, to ask questions, for us to help each other learn and grow. So if you're watching this as a video recording, then please know that there's an opportunity for you to contribute to be in the meeting as a subscriber. And the subscription is only $25 a month, but that gives you access to this meeting and a voice and a space to talk about the work you're doing, or to have live interactions with me and others about moral injury from your point of view. But also, if you subscribe, we're going to send you 2 of our books. And so these 2 books right here, that from Moral Injury Support Network for Servicewomen Incorporated, we'll send you these books. One is the Select Proceedings from the 2020 Women Veterans Military Moral Injury Conferences, and the other one is Moral Injury Research, Discussions, and Support Methods, Volume 1. So both books are filled with research and articles written by other practitioners in the field. So we'll send you these 2 books. You'll also get access to the 2023 Comprehensive Moral Injury Conference taking place in Atlanta, Georgia, next June. And for those of you that are looking for continuing education credit, this conference will do that for you. You may even be able to get continuing education credit from participating in this community of practice. Each month, when we do a session, we will have learning objectives, and we're going to approach it like a continuing education event, but you're able to participate, so it's, as a subscriber, it's going to be much more engaging for you rather than watching the video. The video, of course, it's going to be great. You'll learn for it a lot, but I would encourage you to look at subscription. The Comprehensive Moral Injury Conference, the price to attend that conference in person is $255, but if you're a subscriber, then we just give you free registration for that. So I want to get into this month's meeting. We have with us this month Susan, and she is also a member of our staff. She's a public health practitioner and a public relations specialist for us. So welcome, Susan. So I'm looking forward to having more people on. This is like I said, our first session, our first episode, but we have room for lots of other people. We could have 100 people on this meeting if we wanted to. So that's up to you. And I think a lot of your organizations, those of you that are part of organizations as psychologists, social workers, etc., I think would sign on for you to subscribe and get this continuing education. But all right, so going forward tonight, we have 3 main learning objectives. That's one, we're to define moral injury. That's number 1. Number 2, describe how it affects people's self-esteem. And number 3, explain ways chaplains, psychologists, social workers, and other caregivers can help a person rebuild their self-esteem. So that's the name of tonight's episode, is repairing self-esteem. So first, let's talk about what moral injury is. And moral injury occurs when someone experiences a very traumatic event that greatly disturbs their sense of right and wrong, or how the world should work. It can happen due to a singular event or as an accumulation of many disturbing incidents. Although moral injury was originally conceptualized as something that occurs to military personnel in combat, any human being could experience moral injury. Let's look at some examples. So Charlie, a U.S. Army Airborne Ranger, while deployed overseas, follows orders and attacks a building believed to hold enemy soldiers. He uses hand grenades, satchel charges, and machine guns to clear rooms of occupants. When surveying the carnage, he notices that some of the dead bodies are unarmed women and children. The guilt he feels for killing innocents is overwhelming and affects him for many years. Let's look at a different example, very different scenario, but still moral injury. So Susie is an attractive executive assistant to Joe Baker, the CEO of ABC Corporation. I don't know what ABC Corporation does, but we'll go with it. She has been working for the company for a year now. Her boss has always been very friendly, but lately he seems to have developed an attraction to Susie. She noticed that he often gets very close to her and comes behind her and touches her back when they're working together in his office. One night while away at a conference together, Joe asked Susie to his hotel room to help him finalize a memo he's writing to the board of directors. Susie suggests that the restaurant area might be a more appropriate place. Joe insists, saying that the restaurant is too noisy. Smiling, Joe says, "Don't worry, you're perfectly safe with me. No funny business." Against Susie's better judgment, she agrees to meet him in his room. Susie has only been working for Joe for a year, is a single mother, and needs a job. She worries that if she does not comply with the boss, she will get fired. Later that night, while working in Joe's room, Joe forces himself on Susie and rapes her. Susie is devastated and feels tremendous shame, guilt, anger, and betrayal. So moral injury can occur in nearly any setting, any industry, any place where humans are interacting with each other. MI is an ancient problem. I use MI as, a shortened version of moral injury, obviously. It's an ancient problem, but it's a new phenomenon as it relates to research. We have a number of doctors and psychologists and so on doing research in moral injury, but by and large, it's something that over the last 2 or 3 decades we've conceptualized into a term, but it's always been there. I mean, ever since Cain and Abel, way back in the Garden of Eden, or outside the Garden of Eden, but in the book of Genesis, if you will, for those who read those scriptures, one human being wronged another human being in a very immoral way. And, we have that. So let me stop and ask, are there any questions or any further discussions about the definition of moral injury? Does that make sense to you, Susan?
Perfectly, yes.
Yeah. So good. But I wanted to conceptualize moral injury in a broad, look at 2 very different examples, because typically, as I said, moral injury was conceptualized on the basis of the experiences of Vietnam veterans. But as you really sort of broaden your scope and think about, one human being harming another one in a way that's very wrong or makes the person feel very wrong, you have moral injury. Now a person can become morally injured because harm that was done to them, but it can also happen. A perpetrator can morally injure themselves too. I mean, we sort of sometimes make the assumption that, a rapist or someone who kills somebody or whatever, like they're psychopaths, they have no code of honor, they have no morals, but that's not really the case for most people. I mean, and it doesn't have to be rape, or it doesn't have to be murder. You could you could you could do any other kind of harm. You could behave, let's say, in a very unethical way at work, or feel like you were pressured at work to do something that violated your morals, and at the moment you gave into the pressure, but then later you felt horrible for doing it. You could have been lied to by a boss. Like I sort of used the example of the airborne ranger, Charlie, and that came from a real example, right? That they were often told before they attacked a building that, it's a free, what we call in the Army, a free fire zone, right? Everybody, you don't have to, everybody's a target, right? Because they're all enemy combatants or whatever. And so in that case, you use all the weapons at your disposal. You can throw grenades in a room, you can throw charges in a room, you can blow everything up, because it doesn't matter. Everybody's a combatant. But, Charlie found out that many times that wasn't true. But it wasn't his fault. He was told, he was given bad intel, but he still felt terrible about it. And so did his fellow soldiers. I mean, he said the reason why we drank so much during deployments or after deployments was because we were trying to just do something with our guilt, and we didn't know we didn't understand what we were trying to, what we were really dealing with, because nobody had taught us about moral injury. They just taught us how to kill and, be good combat soldiers. So you can also experience moral injury from witnessing something. Let's say you witnessed someone being harassed or assaulted and didn't do anything about it, and later felt that, this was really bad, and that you didn't do anything. As I interviewed women veterans for our research, even though at the time they felt disempowered to help, like one woman worked as a sexual assault and response and sexual harassment response coordinator, and she really struggled because she got into the job to help people, and then found that she was powerless to do so because maybe commanders didn't take the report seriously, or because the perpetrator was a respected soldier of some kind, that they dismissed things. And so she felt morally injured because she wanted to help but couldn't, or felt she should help, or she should have done more and she couldn't. And it's often like years later when that still bothers her, because often when you're talking about moral injury, there's not something they could do later. If you perpetrate a crime overseas, or you do something overseas, when you deploy back, there's nothing you can do to make amends for that family that you saw killed or whatever. So you can be a perpetrator, you can be a victim, you can be a witness, and still experience moral injury. And that can happen, in medical fields. Doctors who feel like they have to choose life and death for people, or nurses, because there's inadequate resources. There's too much focus on just taking care of patients that have money or the right insurance and not providing equal health care to everybody. People can experience moral injury due to racism, and other kind of isms, right? That where they feel like it's wrong. And there's somewhat of a difference between moral injury and an ethical violation. Moral injury involves trauma, and that's a key component, right? Trauma is a broad category, but I see, we often see ethical violations on a regular basis at our work. People fudge a report a little bit, or I work with chaplains. Sometimes I feel like some chaplains might be too self-centered or too focused on careerism rather than helping soldiers or whatever. I mean, you can see it anywhere, and to the extent that bothers you has a lot to do with moral injury. Not that there's a clear delineation of this is definitely is and this isn't, but in general, I would say if you're bothered by something but you don't feel traumatized, I'm not sure that's a moral injury. It might be more like a moral concern, or you can feel that something's wrong. But moral injury happens on the level where you're really struggling to process it. You're really struggling to cope with it. And so it's something that violates your deeply held religious beliefs or moral beliefs. You don't have to be a religious person to be morally injured. You could be an atheist. You could be agnostic. You could just be a human being of some kind, right? And feel even atheists, right? Atheists have a view of the world, things that are right and things that are wrong. They feel like certain laws are right or certain laws are wrong, or certain behaviors are accepted and not accepted, that kind of thing. So moral injury is not about religion. It's about your deeply held moral beliefs. You may get those based from a religious background. You may get those, we get our moral beliefs from a lot of different, sources. We have family, we have parents, religion, laws, codes of ethic at work, whatever. So that kind of frames moral injury in a general way about what it is. So I would say, if you're looking for a definition of moral injury that's sort of a one sentence or a quick view, it's I think of moral injury as three basic elements. There's trauma, a traumatic event of some kind, right? It disturbs someone's deeply held sense of right and wrong, and it's something that they then have a difficulty coping with, or it affects them in a deep way. So the second learning objective we want to cover is describe how it affects people's self-esteem. So morally injured people often state that their self-esteem has been wrecked because of what they've done, seen, or been the victim of. They no longer feel valued as a person or do not believe that they can be redeemed. Women often feel objectified as sexual toys rather than cherished human beings. We often assume that criminals are psychopaths and that they deserve what they get. In actuality, many of them are morally injured because of the crimes they committed. And talking to a chaplain that works in the prison system, he's mentioned that to be true, that he saw. When you have low self-esteem, you feel unworthy of the good things in life. such as happiness or the love of other people. Low self-worth can lead to anxiety, depression, and even suicide. The good news is that there are things that caregivers, family members, and supervisors can do to help someone repair their self-esteem. Well, I think it's interesting when people can have low self-esteem for a variety of reasons. I think personally, my own feeling is most people are walking around with a low sense of self-esteem in general. They just don't value themselves as highly as they should. We tend to look down on ourselves. We tend to be hypercritical of ourselves. Even high performers who are athletes or very good at their job often feel it's often as a cover or because they feel a low sense of self-esteem that they work so hard to achieve, because the fear is they are a low value person. And so to try to get ahead of that fear or outpace that fear, they work very hard at work or seek to achieve. If they're ever to fail at something, that's when their low self-esteem or self-worth gets confirmed for them, and they feel like, yeah, obviously I am a piece of garbage because look how I failed at this, right? So there are a lot of reasons that people have low self-esteem. It doesn't necessarily mean they're morally injured, but I do think if you have somebody who does have a low self-worth, self-esteem, and usually people don't trumpet that out. They don't, hi, I'm Dan and I have low self-worth, right? So you tend to have to get to know people over a period of time, maybe supervise them or be a friend to them, or in some case a parent or whatever. You get to know the person really well, and then you can start identifying ways that they have a low self-esteem. But if you have somebody with a low self-esteem, I've found that there is often moral injury was a key event for them. And it may not be that they identify a moral injury or even know what moral injury is, but when you hear their story, you talk through it, you realize, okay, there's some moral injury here because maybe they were sexually assaulted in their past. Or it could be a whole lot of things. So again, you shouldn't assume that people with low self-esteem have a moral injury, but it's certainly worth noting, or it's a possibility that could be a big reason for it. So when you think about self-esteem and moral injury, as I mentioned, if it can often destroy someone's self-value, because if they're the victim of say a sexual assault or some other kind of attack or crime, maybe harassment, gender harassment, sexual harassment, or even racial harassment, racism, they can start to feel like a piece of garbage because they're being treated that way. If they commit a crime or do something really bad, they may think, I must be a bad person because look what I did, right? So it's very difficult to have high self-worth when you're either the victim or the perpetrator of these kind of devastating activities. And so how can we help somebody rebuild their self-esteem? And that's learning objective 3. How can we help rebuild someone's self-esteem, whether they had self-esteem in the beginning or not? They may very well start off in life with low self-esteem because of their early childhood experiences. But even that can be built upon. So everyone has some level of self-esteem, but how can we how can we build that? And that's what we want to talk about. Self-esteem is a person's own evaluation of their worth as a human being. It relates to how they see themselves and how they think others view them. Self-worth is somewhat fluid in that when we achieve a goal, enter a high state of joy and peace through meditation, say for instance, or attend church services, we feel good about ourselves. When we fail, receive criticism from others, or are the objects of harassment, our self-worth often takes a hit. What we want to do is not only help a person rebuild his self-image, but help him create a strong, permanent view of himself or herself that is unshaken by events or the actions of himself or others. And that's a tall order, right? It's very easy to feel, if you do something really stupid at work, which happens to me on a regular basis, it's hard to feel like you're valuable, because we tend to link our value to our performance, right? If you're an athlete, you're getting paid to perform, and you don't perform. In actuality, if you have a high self-esteem, you could say, well, okay, I didn't perform well, but that doesn't mean I'm a bad person, or that doesn't mean don't have value as a human being, a person, right? But we tend to really link our self-value, which should be a permanent feeling, or a permanent foundation, right, with something that's temporary. Our performance, how we feel that day, whether we had a bad hair day or whatever, right? So one of the keys is we want to de-link our self-esteem to our behavior. The fact is that, from my perspective as a Christian and a spiritual person, my self-esteem, my self-value comes from God, and God is bigger and greater and more loving than any one action or activity I take part in. Even if I do something really horrible, there are ways to be forgiven, and my value is unchanged. I'm created unique, individual, and created as a critical, important part of his kingdom. That's from my perspective, and not everybody's going to share that perspective, or has to. So how can we help build someone's self-esteem so that they have a stronger, more permanent view of themselves, not just something that's very fluid and can shift moment by moment? So what I offer is three ways, or three parts that can happen. One is to help the person establish a source of value that does not shift. For religious people, this means reminding them that they are created in the image of God. From that standpoint, God, a loving, gracious, forgiving, supreme being, established their immutable worth. For non-religious types, I would say the caregiver can talk about the person's uniqueness as human beings, why they matter in the world, and how they contribute to humankind in a way that is not replaceable. So, and that kind of thing you could also talk to about a religious person. But for a non-religious person, right, God is not going to be meaningful to them, but who they are, their uniqueness in the world as human beings, that can be. And how do you, and it's, so those are some basic ideas or principles. It's hard to really know exactly what to say until you're in front of somebody. But, you can think about those principles. Does that make sense, Susan? Or
yes, it sure does. Yeah, that's exactly, as a Christian, that's how I look at it too. It's not what I do, although I want to do the right things, but
right.
My position as a Christian. So yeah, that makes perfect sense. And then, as you say, the second one, that's what you've got to work with also. When you have a person in front of you you'll probably see what will speak to that person.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And it often is, that, these things take time. Right. And I don't know if I put this in my notes. Yeah, I did. So I won't, labor it too much right here, but, again, people are not going to come out right up front like, I have a low self-image, and because they often don't recognize that that's the core part of their problem, but they might use terms like, you know, um, let's see, trying to think of some actual conversations I had with people. Um, you know, I don't feel I'm very good at this, or I maybe some better examples will come to me in a minute, because you get in these counseling sessions, you're just listening for clues, right, about their self-esteem. I remember, I guess this could be one example. This is an example I used. I could tell the person had low self-esteem, but I was having a hard time helping them understand that was a part of why they had a hard time seeking help, right? And they would, things like, I don't want to waste your time, my problem's not important, this kind of stuff, right? That can clue you in. They don't feel valuable enough to, and really, if you think about, if I have a high self-esteem and I'm struggling and I need help, it's not hard for me to ask for help. I feel like I deserve some help because I'm a human being. And so I think that's part of the problem with help getting people to use help seeking behavior, is they may not feel worthy of it. So I asked her and said, how would you think, we might, because she worked as part of the staff in the building, right? And a lot of people knew her and stuff, and so they had a high she had a high reputation for being, a really stellar worker, and so on and so forth. So I asked her, I said, how do you feel like people would rate you as a worker, as a member of the staff, and so on, how valuable you are to us, that kind of thing? And she said, I said, just based off what we said, right? Not based on what you think you are, but what people have said about you, your work, all that kind of stuff. Because everywhere you go, people would praise her, and or they would tell me like, man, you're so lucky you get to have this person on your staff or whatever, right? And she said, well, probably 6 or 7. And I said, it's probably much higher than that, more like 10, but okay, whatever, right? How would you value yourself as a person? And there was a very, very long pause, because I think she knew I trapped her, but she said, like a 1 or a 2, so I got her to admit to, but she never really thought about it in those terms. But it took quite a few sessions to get there. So that wasn't like the first thing, but
Yeah.
the only point I'm making is that people often don't see their problem as being rooted in self-esteem. They see it as, these other ancillary things.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
The second thing I would say, so the first step would be to establish a source of value that does not shift. The second thing would be, to help the person understand that mistakes, no matter how seemingly grievous, do not mar a person's value. And we kind of talked about that already. But regardless of how awful someone was treated or how terrible of a mistake the person made, they deserve to get the chance at redemption. Their inner being and value was not destroyed due to this mistake. And so that has some religious connotations. But I think if people are, if we're all linked to our performance, our values linked to our performance, we're all kind of screwed, right? Because some days we do well, some days we don't. Some days I'm a very loving, caring person. At other times I'm a grouch that nobody wants to be around. So it's, you know, it can't be just based on, you know, that kind of shifting our performance. It has to be, you have to, as a human being, we've got to be able to know that we can make mistakes and we're still valuable. Many times things look like mistakes in hindsight, but in the moment that they occurred, the person was using the information that they had available to them at the time. So if this is the case, the caregiver can help the person let themselves off the hook due to lack of information or empowerment at the time. So if we go back to Charlie, the airborne ranger, at the time, if he would have known there were innocents in the building, right, he would have taken it, he would have done it differently. But he was a sergeant who didn't have a lot of authority, right? And some rank, some authority. But when the platoon leader or the commander says, you know, this is how, you know, it gives an order and there's no other information that leads the sergeant to believe it's an illegal order or anything else is wrong or whatever, he doesn't have a choice. I mean, he can't just say, you know, I don't like that and I'm not, you know, you obey orders. And so hindsight being what it is, you can easily look back and say, well, I shouldn't have done that. But given the information you had, you acted honorably. You know, if all those people in the building were enemy combatants, you still might feel really bad because just the nature of war is not, you know, a fun thing, and it has its own emotional traumas, whether you did it right or not, you know, if you follow the rules. But there's a difference between following the rules of engagement and you know, defeating the enemy in combat, a legitimate enemy in combat, and killing innocent people. And so that's, you know, it may not assuage all their bad feelings about that incident, but you can help them work through the guilt piece of you behaved honorably given the information you had, the fog of war and all that, right? If you look at someone who was raped, you know, you get sometimes women who have a lot of guilt and shame about that. Now, shame is different than guilt. Shame has to do with what they experience and how that made them feel and the ugliness of the situation. But guilt is about doing something wrong. So, you know, sometimes they feel like I should have done something to stop it. I shouldn't have drank with that person. I shouldn't have been with that person. But if you think back, well, this person was a friend. It was a trusted friend. You know, you should be safe enough to drink with a trusted friend. And, you know, you were so traumatized by what was happening, so surprised by it, you know, you really weren't empowered or enabled. You know, you're sort of in shock at what was happening to you. That's not the same thing as being able to look back on it much later and knowing all the information you have about, I would have never done whatever. Like, yeah, sure, if you'd have known, you'd have never had that first drink, you'd have never went, you know, you'd have never made yourself vulnerable to this person, but you didn't know. I mean, there's no way you could know. And so again, there's a way to, you know, to kind of let them off the hook and say, let's understand what your real empowerment was at that point, what level of agency you really had at that point. And let's, you know, look, you're a human being, you have vulnerabilities. That doesn't make you a bad person. It just means you made a mistake, but it wasn't, you don't even have to look at, in that case, it's a mistake. You trusted somebody who later turned out to be untrustable or unworthy of your trust, but there's no way you would have known that. And, so not your fault, right? You're the survivor, not the, so, does that make sense?
Perfect. Yes. I don't think most people would know how to lay it out like that. That's the benefit of having a chaplain or a counselor to
Right.
help you understand it. We're often not aware, I guess, of how we got to the point we're in, but we need help to somebody, as you've said before, I think, to journey with us and help us to get to the destination. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great point. I think, I mean, it's human nature to zero in on to have a certain frame of reference, and then have the blinders on to something else. So this second number 2 that we're discussing here is about helping them with new perspectives. Is there a different way to look at this than you had before that could maybe help you feel better about yourself? So again, we're rebuilding self-image. There are other aspects of a case like a rape or Charlie the Ranger, whatever. There's a lot to it. But from the self-esteem part, it's rehumanizing them, right? Sometimes moral injury can dehumanize people, or we can dehumanize people and then cause moral injury. This is about rehumanizing and letting people off the hook.
Yeah, I like that.
So the third part would be to establish a new self-image. It's not enough to revisit old sins and dismiss or forgive them. And I use the word sin just because to make a point there, but it may, depending on your religious affiliation, but I'm not really saying the person has sinned. I'm just saying, that word sins often, it feels dirty. And so it feels, what it is. And so if the person is feeling like they really committed a sin, it's not enough to just dismiss or forgive that. We need to help them look forward to a new version of themselves that has a high self-esteem. And one way to help that is with daily affirmations. So it may seem kind of cheesy or goofy, but it really does, standing in front of the mirror in the morning and affirming, your value, affirming your worth, you're programming your brain. The way you feel about yourself has to do with what others, and more importantly, what you have said about yourself. So if we really listen to ourselves, so if someone criticizes and we buy their criticism as truth, we're really criticizing ourselves. If somebody says you're really ugly and you go, I know I am, it's true, even though that's garbage, right? Nobody's ugly. We're all just uniquely made. So, but, and so you can reverse that with some daily affirmations that you don't even necessarily have to believe yourself right off. But if you say them often enough, you repeat a lie often enough, that it becomes truth. Well, if you repeat, there's really no one that can say whether you're ugly or not, using that example, right? Because it's in the eye of the beholder. And if you decide that you're not ugly, that you're beautiful, and you're beautiful. But if you decide you're beautiful, who's to say you're wrong, right? There's no objective truth to beauty, value, and all that. There's there's no objective way to say, well, if your skin color is this, if your blue eyes are this, if your nose is this shape and whatever, that's beautiful. If it's not, then, this is a 10, this is not, there's no such thing, right? It's just whatever you think, whatever you want to believe, whatever you, and so you can, if you, whatever you tell yourself often enough, you'll begin to believe it. And that's, so these daily affirmations, are a good tool, and they're easy to do, right? It's free. You're going to look in the mirror every day when you brush your teeth, comb your hair, whatever. That's the time to remind yourself how important you are, how valuable you are, because, whatever daily affirmation you want to do. You can offer people reading material. There's tons of books, magazines, and blogs that talk about elevating self-esteem. Like many other people, I've struggled with self-esteem over the years. And so, I've got this library of books behind me. And if you'd really go through them all, you'd find multiple self-help, self-worth, self-value type books, different psychological kind of books. I've read blogs, and just Google things. And there's some psychologist, there's some person, some pastor, whatever, that's written something about self-worth, value, whatever. And so there's tons of reading material. And what that does, that reading material helps a person, it acts like a mirror for somebody. If you read, and it's sort of like the way we work as human beings. If somebody publishes a book and they have doctor in front of their title, and they publish a book about self-esteem, and they have a nice writing style and something you like, well, you read it, you tend to assume they must know what they're talking about because they're a doctor, right? And you tend to validate it. And that also has a psychological effect on yourself, and it works. I mean, it's very, very useful. So you can offer people reading material that they can then read and take on for themselves. And then the final thing I would say is, I kind of alluded to it earlier. When you helping somebody with moral injury, that's generally not like a 1 or 2 session kind of thing. You may need to see this person every week, every other week, once a month, for weeks and weeks or months till they get, to help them develop some things they can do themselves and help them get past a certain point in their feelings of mental health. And so one thing you can do is offer reoccurring counseling sessions. And in these reoccurring sessions, you can ask people how their week or month went, how often you're seeing, how did it go, and how are you feeling about yourself? And, you have to establish trust and have a person that is willing to open up with you about that. But those kind of pointed questions, they can say, well, I'm not feeling very good. I did this, I did that. And then that gives you a chance to re-engage them about their self-esteem. Remember what we said last time. We said, your performance and your value are not linked. So let's talk about that, whatever. So reoccurring counseling sessions can get after that by letting people talk about how it's been going for them, how they're feeling about themselves, and then you can, re-engage them. How's that work for you? Does that make sense to you?
I like it. I like what you said about they've been dehumanized, and now you're to rehumanize. And that applies to everybody, as you said, right. Not just people that know they've experienced moral injury, but to all of us. We're all vulnerable and insecure and don't always know our value and worth. So it really really speaks to me that this is very valuable to do with people.
Right. Okay. And the world doesn't you mentioned people. I mean, it doesn't reaffirm our value that often. I mean, there's
No,
not that many we
no.
experience in a day that really makes us feel good about ourselves,
Right.
and I think a lot of that has to do with so many people walking around with low self-esteem, and they sort of visit that pain on others. But also we live in a world that's very that's filled with conflict, and there's a lot of competition with humans in all sorts of ways, and very performance oriented. Even if you're, if you have a seemingly the job like a janitor or something like that, an important job, but you would think, well, what kind of performance goes with that? There's, the janitors in our building, they have checklists, they have inspections, so doesn't matter what your job is, there's somebody looking over your shoulder, somebody who's validating it or whatever. And so this kind of world makes it difficult to maintain a sense of self-value. Even if you grew up in a good home, you can still struggle with that. And I know plenty of people that grew up in a wonderful home and they still struggle with it. So nobody's immune from it.
That's right.
But when you're talking morally injured people, often like their entire whatever self-value they had has come crashing down for them. So
Right. Well, I was thinking back when I was in high school, I was very competitive. I did help my fellow students with homework and stuff, but then now coming back to school as a public health student, there was this little bit of competitiveness that rose up in me. But then I started thinking, this is my cohort. These are the people we all want to learn and we all want to do well and be valuable.
right.
So take every opportunity to compliment somebody on something that they did. But you have to be conscious of it. It's not always just automatic, because as you said, we live in, that's not what comes to mind first, but it makes me happy to know that I am starting to be aware and look out for opportunities, even to compliment the janitor at the public library and say, thank you for keeping this place clean. It matters so much. But we do have to bring it to our minds, I think, every day, as you said, affirmations, and remembering that we're here to help other people have a better day, a better life.
Right.
Yes, that really speaks to me.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I think about all the folks, and there's another Susan that works with us, doing some things for our organization, and I think on our signature block it says be kind to everyone, because you never know what battles people are struggling with, something like that.
I like that. Yeah.
And that's true. You never know what people are dealing with. And in the chaplain corps, it's my job to be that uplifter and stuff, but you don't have to be a chaplain to, I'm only going to interact with so many people in a given day, no matter what, but we're all interacting with everyone,
That's right.
It's so even just simple smiles and highs and, just sends a message to someone that they're valuable. And the other thing that I didn't put in here, and I'll kind of close with this, that I think I have used in the past, and is that when we receive a compliment, we should buy it,
Yeah.
and so often people say, oh, you did such a good job. No, not really. It was nothing. We we don't have to say, yes, I am the greatest, and I'm glad you acknowledge that, but we can say, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yes.
You look really good today. Thank you. Thanks. It's a new outfit, whatever. So we can just use that to our benefit, right? Somebody takes the time to compliment us rather than like having this sort of false humility thing or feeling like I had, or that we're not worthy. We could just, thank them for it, and then our own head say, wow, I must be good because they mentioned it, right? I must, that's free chicken, right? That's free
right.
affirmations that you can just buy and use. And so I teach people that whenever people, going back to the person I was talking about earlier on the staff, she was very much in the habit of dismissing her compliments or and it's like, don't do that, man. You're getting free chicken. Not only do you want to thank the person for saying it, but in your own mind you can think, wow, I must, that must be true, right? And if someone criticizes, you can say, in your own mind, you can say that's garbage, right? Because again, there's no objective, like just because you buy the compliment doesn't mean you have to also buy the criticism. You can choose to believe whatever you want, right? And if you're trying to build your self-esteem, then you got to be your own best cheerleader, and you got to be your own your own salesman, so to speak, and just decide for yourself. So
exactly, yeah. Well, if we believe we are valuable in God's eyes, then we should accept that and agree with that, and try to show other people the same thing. As you said, we don't know how to receive compliments, but we should make it a habit of saying thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to close tonight. Thank you for your kindness and attention and contributions, Susan. I appreciate it. Looking forward to having more subscribers, more people having these kind of conversations.
Yes, I like it. Yeah.
Good. Next month's subject on healers will be talking about revitalizing the disempowered. So morally injured people often feel disempowered, harmed by the institution of which they work, or unable to move on from their injuries. In our next episode, we'll discuss this problem in detail and how to help people feel empowered or able to sort of move forward. So that'll be next month. We do this the first Wednesday of each month. So that would be December, whatever that is. December 7th.
7th, okay.
Yep, 7 p.m. Eastern time. We'll use the same link every time. So, but when people subscribe, they'll get the link, they'll get the whole schedule, they'll get the books, they'll get the ticket to the conference, and
wonderful.
They'll get a chance to continue to interact on these subjects. So
it's wonderful. I have a question. Is this going to be a podcast on your website?
So the recordings will make available free. And so after, it'll take me a few days to get it uploaded, but it should be available next week on the YouTube channel. And, I'll make sure people know about that, put the link on the website, that kind of thing. And so people that haven't yet subscribed or weren't able to be in tonight, they can still watch the recording of this session. So
great. Yeah, I love it. It's very informative. I appreciate it.
Yep, you're welcome. It'll also be we'll hang it on our Buzzsprout page, and that is also on most of the other kind of podcast channels. You can find it. So it'll be out there, but I'll make sure the link's on the web page and people can get it from there. So
super. Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate being able to participate.
Yeah, great. Thanks for coming on, and we'll see you next month.
Right, super. Thank you. Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.